continuing on to the second part of this, what we have is we're now going to be using inverses to solve equations like this. So basically what we have is we have a trig function of the inverse of a trig function. Now keep in mind, when you take the inverse of a trig function, what you're really doing is figuring out what your theta is. So essentially we're going to be figuring out the cosine of theta. The key is though is to figure out what theta is first. So now we're going to do approximate here. So anytime you see the word approximate, that means with calculator. Okay, and it says using a calculator here. So going through this, we will put this right into the calculator. The inverse tangent of 2/3. Okay, so you will do that first. You put that in the calculator and you end up with the cosine of 33.69. And then you just take the cosine of 33.69 and you get an answer of 0.832. This stuff should be pretty easy when you use a calculator. Okay, over on the rest of your page, I know part of it is cut out, but we have the inverse cosine of 2/5. You put that into the calculator. We have cosecant of 113.58. Now remember, when you're using a calculator with things like cosecant, you need to rewrite that as the sine, so it'll be 1 over the sine of 113.58. Put that in the calculator and you should get 1.09. So what do we do when we want to actually do this without a calculator? So finding exact answers, very important, that is without a calculator, always. So what would we do for the same problem? Well, first of all, we shouldn't get a decimal answer ever, because how could we get a decimal answer without using a calculator? So what we want to do is we want to look at what we're trying to find the inverse of. Remember, anytime you're doing the inverse of a function, what we do is we want to figure out what the angle is. So what the immediate thing that I do is I draw a triangle. And remember, we're trying to figure out what our theta is. So let's look at tangent. So tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. So therefore 2 is going to be opposite. 3 is going to be adjacent. So before we can do anything else, we need to figure out what our third side is. Because remember, we're just trying to figure out what the cosine of theta is. So this whole thing is equal to theta. So I don't really need to know what theta is to solve for this once I know what my hypotenuse is. Because think about it, we have cosine of theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So I don't need to know what the value of theta is, I just need to know what my hypotenuse is. So we go 2 squared plus 3 squared equals, and we're going to call this hypotenuse. Hypotenuse squared. So we end up with 4 plus 9 equals h squared. 13 equals h squared. H equals root 13. So now that we know that h is equal to, so the hypotenuse is square root of 13. So we put square root of 13 on the hypotenuse. And now we can answer this question. Adjacent over hypotenuse. So the cosine of theta is 3 over the square root of 13. We have to rationalize our denominator as always. Root 13 over root 13. So we have 3 root 13 over 13. Now, the last thing that we want to pay attention to is we have to consider our quadrants. So let's make sure that our answer is indeed positive. So what you want to be thinking about here is with the inverse tangent of 2/3, where is the inverse tangent of 2/3? Where is it even allowed? Remember, we don't have a theta here. We're not solving an angle. So we do have to make sure that we follow the domain of where tangent can be. And we said that the tangent can only be on our right-hand side over here. So think about where tangent is positive. Is it in the first quadrant or is it in the fourth quadrant? Well, tangent is positive in the first quadrant, which means that the cosine is going to have to be in the first quadrant as well. So the answer has to stay positive in this case. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to do this one on your own and put your answer into Edpuzzle, and then we'll kind of see how you do if you have questions on this, then we'll obviously deal with this when we come to class tomorrow as well. So go ahead and put your answer in the Edpuzzle, and when you're done, just hit continue, and that'll pretty much be the end of the video. So here we do the same thing that we did before. We label our sides. -2, A is the side we don't know. 5 is our hypotenuse because of adjacent over hypotenuse. We figure out that our A is the square root of 21. Notice the cosine, if it's negative, it would have to be in this quadrant right here. So, which is really irrelevant because the sides of the triangle are going to be appropriate as needed. So then we look at the cosecant. The cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. So it's the reciprocal of sine. So you have square root of, oh, I did mess this up, I'm sorry. We have 5 over root 21. So hypotenuse over the opposite is 5 over root 21, multiplied by root 21 over root 21, and we end up with 5 root 21 over 21. And this will be positive, and the reason why it's positive is because we're in the second quadrant, and sine and cosecant are positive in the second quadrant. So again, if we have to talk about this a little bit more, we will. I will see you in class.